Hey gang, what's up? Werner von Wallenrod. Today I want to talk to you guys about a really slept on MC. Sometimes I talk about kind of crazy, interesting records or wild records, but they aren't necessarily the greatest. It's more just like a novel story or something. So today I want to kind of get us on track, talk about someone really underrated, really talented, and also from my part of town, New Jersey. I want to talk about a guy named Supreme C. Who you might not know that well, but you've probably heard of, at least in passing. I already did a video or a blog, I forget which, about this one, the Newark Anonymous Click. This is a really dope record, definitely what I hyped on mostly at the time, of course, which is probably still the most salient point about this record, is that it features Slang Ton, great MC from the Outsiders, who we lost way too early. He's on a couple songs on here. It's an EP, it's 3 songs, he's on 2 of them. And so that's basically what I was talking about. It's a really dope MC EP by a bunch of Newark MCs, including Slangton. But also on here is a guy named Supreme C. Before the NAC, he was part of the Zoo Crew. Now, I was actually editing one of Custodian Records interviews that are on my channel. Check it out. And the topic of the Zoo Crew came up, and I remember talking to Custodian. No, I don't really know all that much about them. I certainly heard of them. They're certainly fairly infamous. But, they're, again, pure Newark, and I'm from New Jersey, but not from Newark. I've certainly been to Newark, a billion times if you count the train station, but outside of that, like to shop and all that kind of stuff, but it definitely wasn't my neighborhood. And certainly, though, if you're from Newark, you know all about the Zoo Crew, because they are pretty infamous, at least for their time. They were, I guess you would say they started out as a street gang, but they kind of blew up pretty large. There was a big drug dealing operation. I'm not talking out of school because a lot of them, including the head, went down and are probably still serving time in jail. Like, they're pretty big news stories on them. But also, during that time, they opened up a lot of local businesses. They had a rap label out, record label out, and they started like a basketball team, which actually still is on to this day, still called the Zoo Crew, despite, the Zoo Crew now having sort of a very dark negative connotation to it in a lot of circles. But I'm more interested, of course, especially for the terms of this video, in the hip-hop label scene, and that's where Supreme C got its start. Now, Zoo Crew, interestingly, again, because it was so multifaceted, it wasn't necessarily a hip-hop crew. There was one record by the Zoo Crew on Zoo Records, or Zoo Crew Records, which put out 3 singles, only one of them actually by the Zoo Crew. And that, if you hear it, it's pretty rare, it's pretty hard to find, although you can hear it online, but the actual record is hard to find, or the original cassettes, is basically, really, honestly, a solo EP. By a guy named Capone, not of CNN, a different Capone, who produced the whole thing. Pretty much, I think he raps the whole thing. He definitely raps on every song. Maybe he has one guy with him on one song, but basically it's a solo EP. And then he's not involved, at least musically, with the other 2 Zoo Records releases at all. The other 2 Zoo Record releases are, first of all, Supreme C's debut EP, Time to Think, which is amazing. And we're going to talk about that, of course. But briefly, it's produced by a guy named Pizzazz. And Pizzazz is one half of the Marked Men. The Marked Men are the only other record on Zoo Crew Records. That's 2 guys. The other guy name was Big Rel. So Big Rel and Pizzazz were the Marked Men. They were pretty good. I would say their stronger suit was production than emceeing, but, they definitely do a capable job. Their EP is pretty dope, for sure. But then Pizzazz also produced Supreme C, and Supreme C is absolutely, like the Capone guy from the Zoo Crew, he's pretty good as an MC. Markmen were pretty good, but definitely in terms of, rhyming skills, it's all about Supreme C. He was the strong, heavy hitter for them. And his EP is killer. His production by Pizzazz is killer. It's a fantastic EP. Again, it's called Time to Think. Like the Zoo Crew record and like the Markman record, it's really hard to find. It's super limited. It came out in 1992. All 3 came out in 1992. But fortunately for us, it was repressed by Sergeant Records. And this is much easier to find. It's actually a French label. I've covered them before. They did some Vince Bundy reissues and stuff that were really dope. So definitely some cool stuff to check for in Sergeant Records. They also did the Markman EP. And they also tend to do their own artists who are French artists, so I'm less familiar with them. But when they come out and they handle some cool repressings again by guys like Vince Bundy and Supreme C, that's when they really jump on my radar. So this, again, isn't even that new. This is 2012, which would have been like, I guess it would have been the 20-year anniversary, maybe that's intentional, of the Supreme C EP, Time to Think. There's no Everything on here is the exact same track listing as the original EP. The instrumentals on the B-side, everything's 100% the same, so there's no like, oh, loss on release songs. But it's so rare and hard to find that you're not going to own Supreme C's EP unless you're dead lucky. We're copped it in 1992 again, or you got this repress. So I definitely recommend the repress. Sound quality is great. It's pretty nice, thick vinyl. It's in a picture cover, although this gorilla thing is really just Sergeant Records logo. It's nothing to do with Supreme C, but they did come up with a nice little crown logo for him. Anyway, I'm going to play some clips, and they're going to speak for themselves. These are 4 killer cuts. It's really just 4 songs, because again, this instrumentals and stuff on the B-side. And they, like I said, they're going to speak for themselves. Supreme C is a really fierce MC. He's really skilled. He's got wordplay, but he's not, like, I tend to sort of think of him as, like, slightly outside, like the Outsiders, which were more jokey and playful. This is more, Supreme C is more of a serious guy. Any criticism I have at all is that some of his punchlines, even for the time in 1992, were a little bit played and kind of corny. Gas me up like Amico and stuff are some lines he says in here. So he has a few of those kinds of things. But for the most part, lyrically, he's on fire. He's got some real serious content in here about street life and stuff like that. He's really, bridging that gap sort of between sort of like an Outsiders and sort of like a Nas. And I don't throw a comparison to Nas around too loosely. Which isn't to say like he sounds like Nas. Like you're not going to be like, which one's Nas, which one's Supreme C? But in terms of talent, like he could definitely roll up on some Nas records and carry his weight and maybe even steal the show. Because speaking of stealing the show, that's probably where you know him from, if anywhere, is his appearances on other guys' records. One most notably, boom, Lords of the Underground. This is the Faith 12-inch, but the B-side is Never Faded. And it's one of those examples where they actually made the video and everything for the B-side as well as the A-side, and the B-side is the one that really took off. And Never Faded, again, Lords of the Underground's second album, one of the hardest tracks, because like Faith is this kind of airy, kind of philosophical song. Some of the other songs are more upbeat. That's like their more kind of street hardcore track. And even then, though, Supreme C absolutely kills it. It is his record, and the Lords of the Underground, frankly, are just on it as guests. It really doesn't help the Lords, the fact that they're kind of crazy, wacky deliveries and pop culture references and all was getting kind of played out. It was a little bit too kind of jokey and cartoonish, and Supreme C came on and had none of that. But even besides that, Supreme C is definitely a skilled MC who steals the show in his own right. And he's also on like the Rotten Rascals album, and he's one of the best parts of that album. And he's got more guest spots too, but we're going to get into that because it comes into the story later. So anyway, that Supreme C came out this amazing EP, very underground, very hard to find, but he was a real talent. He started showing up on other artists' albums, and now he's starting to become like a recognizable name, not a household name, but someone who, if you follow hip-hop at least, you might say, oh, I've seen that name before, yeah, he's pretty good. Which brings us to possibly the most interesting and the least known chapter of the story. So like I said, he was on Rotten Rascals' album. Now, who are Rotten Rascals? Obviously, New Jersey artists, Tretch's little brother, as in Naughty by Nature. So that's who Rotten Rascals are. He's down with them. Naughty by Nature, of course, the second version of the Flavor Unit, the second iteration after it sort of less became Mark the 45 Kings and more Queen Latifah. And they blew up. They had the whole Rolling with the Flavor album with completely Naughty by Nature at the forefront. But anyway, what's interesting and what isn't so terribly known is that Supreme C was signed with the Flavor Unit, and he was meant to be one of the Flavor Unit MCs. He's not on the Rolling with the Flavor album, to its detriment, I think. But here, I'll put up a graphic up here. He recorded a whole album for him. It was meant to come out in 1995. Unfortunately, it never did come out. But I would assume, just based on Supreme C as an MC, it would have been one of their strongest projects. Along with like the Freddie Fox album, which got shelved and eventually came out many years later. But at the time, it got shelved. In fact, speaking of shelved Flavor Unit record, if you look at the same Billboard page, you notice in 1994 another album was supposed to come out by the Big Assistas. They were also Flavor Unit artists. They were on the Rolling with the Flavor album. They had a song on there, and they're all right. That album never came out either. I'm maybe a little bit less disappointed than I am about the Supreme C one, because again, you don't know, what the production would have been like necessarily, who produced what. One thing is the Flavor Unit had, I would say, mixed uneven production. They had some amazing tracks, to be sure. Like, you think of, like, Rotten Rascals, oh yeah, I could listen to that over and over and over and over again, like, a million times. It's definitely sort of a, KG took it from Naughty's style, but it works completely. They sound great on it. But then, like, the rest of the Rotten Rascals album, starts to wear a little thin. It's kind of flat. And a lot of the kind of Flavor Unit stuff, like that whole Rolling the Flavor album, a lot of those songs are kind of like, so I don't know if it would have been an amazing album, but it would have been at least pretty dope. Certainly Supreme C would have more than held up his end. And if Freddie Fox's finally released second album, Flavor Unit album, is anything to go by, then it would have been even tighter than you would have thought at the time. And I'm pretty sure it was recorded. So hopefully maybe there's a chance it could still get rescued and released, some labels want to look into that. Maybe they can dig out the masters and repress it these days. That would be fantastic. It's not, however, the end of the Supreme C saga. Even though that album got shelved, never came out, the whole Flavor Unit thing dissipated, at least as far as the Supreme C. I mean, obviously the unit came back years later, and that's a whole third fiasco. But as far as Supreme C, that was the end. But not the end for Supreme C, because he came back, he got another deal on RCA Records in 2000, or maybe signed in 99. And this time down with Wyclef of the Fugees. This is, so after the Fugees' second album where they were huge, and then maybe kind of starting to come into decline, think of Cannabis, I can't call it, maybe Wyclef spoiled it, that kind of era, which might be A, how and why he got signed to RCA, he's down with Wyclef and all that, but then B, why that album never came out either, which is another sad, frustrating, disappointing story for Supreme C. In the meantime, he did a couple more guests, he did a little ghostwriting, stuff like that, but it's like he's on at least one Wyclef album, I think 2 or 3. He's on Wyclef's Little Brothers album. Anybody Wyclef was producing, he was probably associated with in one capacity or another, either a guest spot or some writing. But he did come out with a couple singles. So this is the first one, Run If You Want to Run. It is produced by Wyclef. Wyclef sings a hook. It's also co-produced by Jerry Wanda, who is Wyclef's cousin. And there's a B-side, This Is It, which is produced by Wyclef's little brother. And they had another single, Brick City. Both songs here are produced by Wyclef's little brother. B-side, this one's called On My Block. Both of these singles, though, are pretty good. Supreme C, still killing it, still coming pretty hard. The production is really what lets it down, but it's not bad. All 4 songs, honestly, they're distinct from each other, but they all have a kind of a common style. There's a lot of instrumentation on it. It's a lot of kind of interesting, not a lot of samples. I think Run If You Want to Run is an Al Green sample or something, but it's not too sample heavy. It's definitely a lot of played instrumentation. There's a lot of layers to it. So it's definitely kind of, serious people seriously worked on it to make it sound good. And it mostly comes off, but it's just not the kind of real kind of, it's the exact opposite of 45 King production. You think of a really catchy, head naughty, dusty old sample. Not that at all. But I'll let you hear clips of it and you can decide for yourselves. I'll play all 4 songs. So they're all pretty interesting. And the album is going to be called Killer Instinct. And unfortunately, again, shelved, lost, we never hear it. I know from press write-ups and stuff like that, though, there's going to be more production by Wyclef and his guys. There's going to be a song with Tretch. There's going to be a song with The Outlaws. Oh, yeah, it's another album that Supreme C was on. He's on The Outlaws album. But he's also going to have The Outlaws on his album. But also, I remember the write-up saying, but don't think Supreme C is all streets. He's also got some smooth radio singles for the ladies and stuff like that. And then I'm yeah, okay, maybe I'm not that crushed that we're not getting Killer Instinct. I'm sure there would have been some dope material on there. I think these songs are actually pretty dope. But probably not his best work. Let's say this. This stuff is good, but nowhere near Time to Think, which is great. Again, though, if anyone could dig up Killer Instinct and release it today, I would absolutely be on board. I would definitely cop it. I'd be more interested in hearing that Flavor Unit album, but I'd definitely love to hear both. And, maybe they could be released in conjunction. In the meantime, whatever happens, though, if nothing gets dug up, if nothing shelved gets released, what has been released, you should definitely check out. You should definitely go back and check out Never Faded if you haven't heard that in ages. Go back to NAC album and absolutely 100% track down his Time to Think album. Again, if you can't find the original, the Sergeant Records pressing is pretty good. It sounds great. Definitely not one you want to sleep on. And Supreme C is definitely not an MC you want to sleep on, which is the whole point of this video. So hopefully you guys know. Here's some clips. See you guys next time.
Yo, Supreme C. Yo, what's up, PG? Somebody had the nerve to say the zoo is about to get sent home. Can you believe that shit? Picture that. Said you ain't got no problems. What you gonna do about that? Check this out. Sticking to one style, Supreme could never do that. A new jack, so brothers be like, who that? Cause I'm hot and artillery's always in stock. So every time I come around, I clear the whole block. I be seeing brothers disappear thin air, hide in there, run here, jump over there. But I don't want them to leave, I want them to see what's happening. When I finish rapping, salute the captain. But after the rhyme, you might say that I'm invincible, influencing you to think I'm a general. Supreme C, the wrong one to mess with, yo. Even though another bro might guess you like I'm a coach. I'm always ready and prepared to battle the whack. But you pass and I ain't talking like a quarterback. By any means necessary, so call the cops. Cause Supreme C's out for mad props. Mad props is what I be out for. Mad props as soon as I hit the door. Mad props is what I be out for. Mad props as soon as I hit the door. Mad props is what I be out for. Mad props as soon as I hit the door. Mad props is what I be out for. Mad props as soon as I hit the door. Mad props is what I be out for. You won't score whenever Supreme C draw. It's my turn. Pick up your mic and unplug it. This is the way I love it. Rugged and cold-blooded. What you trying to find? 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 I got a girl who I can settle down with and don't have to worry who she mess around with. Cause she follows me forever and ever. Do I have a lot of fun? Never, cause she's too clever. Like hiding in the backseat of the car and jumping out on a rap star. Surprise, surprise, when you going without me? And who's the fee in the front seat? She, but I play it off and laugh and say, girl, stop dissing. Give her a kissing, tell her listen. You the only one I ever wanted in life. That's why you the wife. It was a smooth line, she fell for the tail. But I knew she'd be back on my trail. Scared to break up, cause I knew the beauty and the beast under the makeup. It was nothing I could do but stay with her. And each day grew bitter. But I nixed it off and just tried to live. But it ain't working, something's gotta give. She won't run my life, no sir. Either she kill me or I'ma kill her. But anyway, I'm still with her today. Cause she don't play, and you might say I get a lot of action. No, it's just a fatal attraction. You thought I was gone, but I'm still here. You thought I was gone, what you trying to find? You thought I was gone, but I'm still here. You thought I was gone, what you trying to find? You thought I was gone, but I'm still here. You thought I was gone, but I'm still here. I remember the time like Michael Jackson when I first met the fatal attraction. Brothers are yelling, sailing, run fast as hell to the border like Taco Bell. It's fascinating the way that I be drilling synonyms and leaving rappers confusing like M&M's. Supreme C and the C ain't for court. Even though I'm the judge and jury on a charge you brought. Relax, G, and hold on to your seat as I take you for the ride of your life like a car thief. Supreme C can take you through history. 10 years later you'll be an unsolved mystery. I love it when people say, did you see him? Rocking from AM to PM in a large coliseum. And it's better when we're both hype. So I can get bright and shine like a flashlight. Act like you know that I got much dough. And that my man Mo be keeping my head cut low. Supreme C, don't ever try to diss me black. Cause if you do, I'm blowing your chest through your back. No time to be playing cause I'm living the largest. I'm going the farthest, just like Buck Rogers. Take deep cover when I pack a mic on every trip. A 9mm on the hip, waiting for a nigga to slip. You can't touch these lyrics that I be writing. Also exciting and ready to clash with any titan. I'm not cock diesel, but I pop the little weasel that wanna break out like chicken pox or measles. So if you got a jammy click back, hurry up and pull it, or get got by the stray bullet. Run away, get away, just scatter. Supreme C, sharp like a dagger. When I start cutting, you better start ducking. You wanted to blast off, but push the wrong button.
Watch now, you and you. Makes the most of things at once. I mean, no say man, check to make a million. But you know this time you have to take caution. So Supreme C, make them understand.
I tried many different ways to get large, hoping that I could be called Captain or Sarge, in charge of a multi-million-dollar network, and never get hurt. But that was a mistake I made, cause Supreme C was getting paid. So I slept and slept on other brothers'
was out there, yeah, but now the doubt's here. In my face like a surprise. It's a good thing my boy packed the 45. If he didn't, I'd probably be out of the game. But since he did, everything's the same. Never thinking about nothing else. What's help when you got lots of wealth? The next day, out on the block, clientele large. I got all props, new faces. Outside, we spotted each other. No time to hide. I was by myself this time, so I went down and came up with a 9. I bust first, but the other brother bust back, hitting me in the back. As I was laying there scared to blink, I remember saying, I need time to think. Follow me now, wake up on a massive one, I put time for picker. In that is that time, it's a threat, it's time for think. Open on a is a contest, it's up a sink. In a fear, head, you can not think of think. When this mercy, so I talk to my ears now, blink. There's a one on this with them like a tree and one link. Reach up down the foot, me never dancing. I'm not coming in like a pin, I will never know what I think. In a fear, me head, me know it's a time of it, what time to think is what I needed instead of dying. Cause they know when I know that I would be replying. Coming around their way to go to war. Me and the Glock hit the block, they hit the floor.
Yeah. Supreme C up in here. Yeah. B-side for the underground. 1, 2, 1, 2. It's a deck up in here. Yeah. With my man Supreme C. Know what I'm saying? I'm going to do a little something like this, yo. Run if you wanna run. Pull guns if you wanna pull guns. Me, I sit back, smoking herb by the tons in a place called Brick City, the New Jerusalem, where only the good die young. Run if you wanna run. Pull guns if you wanna pull guns. Me, I sit back, smoking herb by the tons. Every hood, every barrel, if you know that you're thorough. Only the good die young. He wasn't even from out town. He came around in a 6 flossing, talking slick things about money in Boston. Talking loud about he had it out of state, but you a nutcase, stay in your place. Mr. Buttface, born my man White O on the low, but yo, he didn't know. Silly hoe told you so, bro. And yo, this brother must be slow. It's old sadistic, enlisted for frames he twisted. I heard he filling up ahead about this and that. He a ghetto diplomat, but now pistol what he looking at. Violated, foul made it in style. I hate it, traded, shade faded. He got annihilated. Call up his people out of town. Now we out of bounds. Clowns, call him tell him bring the Browns in. Gentlemen, this ain't pretend. We spin, get him to bend, blend in, and win. I grin. We all got the devil within. By 10, if you ain't out the kitchen, the max is spitting. Don't worry, I got your back covered. Now hurry. If them jokers even think about it, jokers is buried. Run if you wanna run. Pull guns if you wanna pull guns. Me, I sit back, smoking herb by the tons in a place called Brick City, the New Jerusalem, where only the good die young. Run if you wanna run. Pull guns if you wanna pull guns. Me, I sit back, smoking herb by the tons. Every hood, every barrel, if you know that you're thorough. Only the good die young. They played, made the trade, always okay, we paid, but my man O never obeyed. Supreme C. My nigga Day, Fury, Judge and Jury. Get your bounce on, keep your eyes on the prize, yo. Live, yo, had that gun bust spitting at a rival. And how the fuck could I miss you? I got a fist full of cash, making bail for the pistol. I mess around, I leave that ass twist. Fuck around, I send your body on a bad trip past it. Past sick, but I'm right here. I've been around for a life, yeah, haters get nightmares. I follow through with them hollows too. My nigga High said chill, or them hoes won't swallow you. Follow me or follow you. What they gotta do is what they gotta do. Me, I gotta make a buck, what the fuck? Ain't no time trying to pick them up, just stick them up they ass, I'ma kick them up. A big nigga what? Brick City slick or what? Tie you niggas up, stick by your niggas what? I don't give a damn, fam, listen, understand, I'm an old man in this land. I learned that when I laid the first plan, made the first grand, did the knowledge to the earth, man. Shit is all mines, all rhymes, all tall cap dimes, violating, get a flat line. I'm on a mic like Wick on a motorbike, hauling ass down a turnpike. No shit, what? This is it. The kind of hit that make them other niggas miss. That killer shit. And if you're feeling it, then bounce to the bass. Bang it in your whips. The kind of shit that get it jumping like that. Supreme C shit. So if you want it, we can do it like this. I got them all wide open, got the power to make them legs slide open. I'm hoping I don't need a token to keep you soaking. Open up till you're broken up, ain't no choking up. It's like a whole new beginning and shit. What
What you know about a North nigga? Just to eat, sell drug niggas, mug niggas. I do whatever it takes just to have cake baked, looking good on the plate. Hope you feeling my nuts, the way I'm spilling my guts. Welcome to the struggle where life is hell, so we act out. In the clubs, niggas get smacked out. He back spraying shots all over, I crawl over. Look, my best friend dead, paint the whole town red. It's a shame how we murder our own, blurt out a poem. I try to stay away from shit, but I'm in the zone. Confusion we trap, so move and I stay strapped. Confrontation takes place, he busting back. Look, we all strapped, kinda fucked up, but you gotta be. Hope I win the lottery, I'm scared of what's inside of me. If niggas only got together, we can rock forever, drop whenever, get back on top together. It's all about a family thing, a manly thing. Yo, who up first? Fuck the loot in the purse. North niggas. What you heard about the bricks, nigga?
Yeah, you know, I'm the real stuff.
Huh?
You know, the thug of the streets.
What you know about a North nigga? Shit.
Dog.
What you heard about the bricks, nigga? Tell me that. What you heard about a North nigga? What you know about a North nigga? I'm living life on a run, nice with a gun, a nigga like a sharpshooter. It's preseason, I see reason to murder. Hide the smell, we deep freeze them. MCs bleeding, chip them up, rip them up. Body bag black, slip them up. Photo position, outline and chalk the pose. But keep the body bag closed. Foes, I hate them, but could deal with them. Bust off the Tech 9 to keep it real with them. Niggas step up and murder shit. Take a short, we never heard of it. So we official guys splitting pies. See, we don't give a fuck long as we rise. We hang out in bars with ghetto stars. Careful parking cars in your garage. They breaking your cars, guard them with bars. But ain't nothing safe, not even your safe. Strapped with them guns, stacking them funds. Some bitches shake their ass for them ones. When niggas get knocked, set up and got. My best friend Hop robbed and shot. 25 members started up a scene. But now 100 niggas getting cream. They step on your toes, you get exposed. The Lord knows what we do to foes. Another one sprayed and laid. But our cookouts is like a parade. The feds come through watching my zoo. If somebody snitch, murder the bitch. Meet the murder expert, take him on a death escort. Make your breath short, killing is my best sport. Loud spokesman who greet the crowd, introduce your hostess.